I wasn't sure how much I'd actually use a laser in a normal week, so I decided to use it for everything. I didn't want to make one big finished project because I'm really trying to figure out if this is useful in my shop. So I tried a bunch of different projects to see what was good and what was bad, what worked well and what didn't. I used it to make gifts, shop jigs, decor, toys, and anything else I could think of. In terms of the materials, I started cutting MDF, Baltic birch, maple, walnut, and I even tried some cedar, which we'll get to. A company called WeCreat sent me their 45-watt Vision Pro laser cutter and engraver. They also sent me an air purifier, which is going to be critical in my shop because it's probably not going to have a permanent location. But first, I didn't want the laser to just sit on the workbench and take up space there, so I built a mobile cart for it. I wanted this to be a self-contained laser station that I could move in my shop or out of my shop depending on where I wanted to use it. Now, to make the stand, I sized this to fit the laser footprint and made 4 solid posts by gluing 2 2x4s together. Once these were all squared up, I screwed them together in a frame. I then made a lower shelf to support the air purifier and an upper shelf to support the laser itself. The front edge also needed a small cutout so I can slide out the cutoff tray when I need to empty it. I also added another shelf later to hold materials and scraps. The nice thing about this design is I can always add more stuff hanging on the sides and the back if I need to expand or have a fold-out shelf or something like that. So now with the stand built, I loaded the laser and all the equipment onto it. Now I can start cutting stuff. The first project was simple, a geometric ornament. So I played around with the software this came with, and I made a square within a square, within a square, within a square. And then I cut it out of some 1/8" Baltic birch. And honestly, this is where it feels almost unfair. To cut this out on a scroll saw by hand would take significantly longer. You'd have to drill lots of holes to get into these pockets and disconnect the blade and reconnect it, and it would be tough to get it this clean and consistent. But this is also where I realized you don't just walk up to a laser and cut stuff. There's a lot of time that goes into it and there's a lot of prep. You have to figure out the software. Then you got to sit down on the computer and you got to either design it yourself or you have to find a file that you can buy somewhere so that you can use it. There's a lot of time involved setting up the files, getting the speeds and the power right, maybe doing some test cuts, also getting the laser to talk to the computer. It would probably go faster if you had a good system down and you were just doing repeated cuts over and over, but the initial setup on this is quite involved. And there's a good chunk of time that is more computer time, not shop time. So it's definitely not faster in every situation, but it is more precise and it's more repeatable. The next project I attempted was a layered build. So we took a Maui graphic from the movie Moana and put that into the software, and then I expanded the outline 2 times. Then I sent these files over to the laser and I had it etch out the character and then cut out the profiles of the different sizes. Now you could do all 3 of these with a scroll saw, but it's laser week, so that's what I went with. After doing those layers, I liked the look of that, and so I thought, what if we did a 3D relief map? So I started looking to try to find how I could get one of those. And as a DIYer, I like to kind of figure things out myself. Unfortunately, when it comes to graphic design, sometimes that takes a long time. So I discovered the amazing world of CNC and laser files. There are tons of these out there, and people make them and sell them. So for a few dollars on Etsy, I was able to buy some files of a 6-layered Florida map. Since I'm in Florida now, I figure I gotta make some Florida stuff. One was a Florida map and the other one was kind of a Florida decor. One of the cool features on this laser that not all lasers have is a built-in camera. So this is on the top of the lid, and when I close the lid, I can go back to my software, take a picture exactly of what is in there, and then I can position my design to make sure I'm maximizing the material. And this was an area where the laser really shines, repeatability. Once your settings are right, you can just do the same cuts over and over and over again. And so for these maps, there were 6 layers on them, and the first one took a little bit of time to set up, but then with each layer, I could just put it in, drag the picture over, and go. And if I wanted to, I could keep cutting more of these because I have the files and I could just run the program again. The bottom ocean layers on this were MDF because I was going to paint them. And all of those got a few coats of some rattle can spray paint to make the ocean colors. The top 2 layers I did with Baltic birch because that part you would see, and then I sprayed the whole thing with some clear satin lacquer to seal it all in. This laser project looked really good too when I painted all the edges black so there was no color on the outside, just on the inside. The Florida decor sign that had the palm trees and the sunset, that one was a little bit more complicated to put together, also because it had Florida letters that were individually cut out. Both of these signs were actually sold at an auction for the youth at my church, and they made some pretty good money. Then I wanted to push into into some thicker material. So I made a cool sign for the entrance of my shop that said Dad's Workshop, just in case my kids forget whose shop they're in. Another cool thing about this particular laser is it has an auto lifting feature where you can put in something larger in there or thicker and it will adjust to that automatically and the whole laser goes up and down. It then auto focuses on whatever thickness material you have in there and then starts the cutting. Now the 1/8" material is very forgiving and easy to cut, but with the thicker stuff you kind of have to play with the settings and the speeds to get it to be able to cut all the way through and not just torch the back of it. I grabbed some scrap wood that was the right size and started cutting. Turns out this piece was actually cedar, which is a really soft wood. As I started cutting it, I realized that the cutout pieces were not dropping through the grate like they had in the past, which means the laser was not cutting all the way through the wood. So in order to fix that, I started cutting again with a slower speed, and that made it all the way through the pieces. That seemed to help, but when I pulled the pieces out, I turned them over and it looked like things had gotten pretty toasty under there. There was a lot of scorching, and there were a couple smaller pieces that looked like they had come right out of a fire pit. So for thicker, softer woods, maybe laser isn't the way to go. But if you have some ideas because you've used a laser about how I cut effectively through some softwoods with the laser, let me know in the comments. I was able to get most of it cut all the way through. There were a couple pieces that I still had to clean up with my scroll saw. Once the letters were cleaned up, then I did a little bit of touch-up painting along the edges and glued them to a backer board with some CA glue. Once finished, I was really happy with the result and the install. As a comparison, I then got some maple hardwood, used similar settings, and then tried cutting out some letters again. This time it came out a lot cleaner and didn't burn quite as much on the back. For me, the hardwoods definitely performed better in this situation. But then I tried something completely different, a living hinge. And this one surprised me the most. In the software, I drew a rectangle that was tall and skinny, and then I copied and pasted it a bajillion times to see if it would work. I had seen this in some pictures before, so I thought it might be fun. When this thing came out, I was shocked at how flexible it was. I could bend it into a complete circle. Now this is something that you can't really do with traditional tools. If you wanted to sit there all day with a scroll saw or a coping saw cutting out all these repeated little squares, you probably could, but you would hate your life. The flexibility comes from the pattern itself, but it is still woodworking magic. And this is where the laser really shines. This is something you could add into a lot of projects and incorporate it into corners or edges or a curved top on something. All of those are possible with the living hinge. Next, I tried making a toy biplane from some files that I had purchased. And it turns out that for something like this, the material thickness is really important. This must have been designed with some thicker material in mind because we didn't realize until after cutting it that the pieces had some extra slop in them. And I went back and looked, and the plywood that they designed it with was just a little bit bigger than the stuff that we had. So I had to add a fair amount of CA glue to hold the whole thing together and make it strong, but it still worked. Then I went back into the shop and tried using the laser to make a template because sometimes you don't want a burned edge on everything. So I made a design in the software for the handle on a charcuterie board. My original plan was to use this as a router template to be able to route this pattern in. However, after gluing down the board and having it pop off a couple times, I decided to just use it as a tracing template. So I drew my pattern on and then I cut it out with the bandsaw and sanded it to the line. In this case, the laser was a means to an end, not the project itself. Now, because my laser is going to be mobile, I got this air filtration unit as well. And this has been really fun to use because I can put it inside my shop. And no, it doesn't get rid of all the smell because the enclosure is not completely airtight. However, it gets rid of a ton of it. My shop does not fill up with smoke and it cleans it all internally in this air filtration unit. Now, after using this for a full week and maybe a little bit more, the final verdict on the laser cutter is this is not going to be replacing any tools in my shop, but it is really good at specific things. So it will have a place as well in my shop, but it doesn't mean I'm getting rid of my scroll saw. It works really well for repeatability, detailed, intricate work, batching, and cutting thin materials. It's also pretty useful for making things like living hinges and swirly words. It's really not ideal for thicker stock, quick one-off cuts, and softwoods. There's also the obvious fact that since this is a laser, it's burning the wood. So the edge is going to be black or dark brown once it comes out. Now there's different things you can use to try to wipe it or clean it off, but it will always be a little bit dark and will never quite look like it was actually sanded. And I will say the biggest downside of a laser in general is the setup time. If you're buying a laser because you want to spend more time in the shop, I'm not sure that's going to really give it to you. You got to spend a fair amount of time on a computer too to get it set up, and there's a learning curve. The biggest surprise for me was how often I used it once it was set up. But after a week of real laser projects, this thing definitely has a place in my shop, and I'd like to thank WeCreat for sending it over. It's been a lot of fun. Now, go build something, and we'll see you next time.